When Julia Gillard announced her reshaped cabinet, there was disbelief from Indigenous and health leaders that she'd dropped the Indigenous health portfolio. As a result of the backlash, the Prime Minister reinstated the position, with previous Indigenous Health Minister Warren Snowden getting his old job back. It's a tough role, with the health of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders still lagging way behind the rest of the country in terms of life expectancy, infant mortality and chronic disease. One obvious way to tackle the appalling statistics is to produce more Indigenous doctors to join the 140 already practising in Australia. Rebecca Bailey reports.
It's school holidays and the kids in Dubbo, central western New South Wales, descend on the local skate park.
This is Blackie, Hobie. I'm Adrian. Yeah, he's definitely Bob.
Wellington Cowboys!
The faces here reflect the town's cultural diversity. More than 10% of Dubbo's 40,000 people are Indigenous. But while these boys all seem happy and healthy, it remains a shameful fact that on average Indigenous Australians die up to 17 years earlier than their non-Indigenous peers.
The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health stats are continuing to be deplorable.
The loss and despair within our communities with that gap is almost immeasurable when you see the number of people dying.
It's a plight 19-year-old Dubbo local, Kyani Biles, is determined to change. She's in her second year of a medicine degree at the University of New South Wales in Sydney and is back home for the uni break.
So when you go back, it's 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Kyani Biles is studying to be a doctor because she wants to improve the health problems plaguing Indigenous communities like her own.
If you go out even further than Dubbo, there's no access to health services. And the worst thing about it is most of these diseases and illnesses that are causing this massive life expectancy gap are preventable.
Kyani Biles' Aboriginal father, Craig Biles, is a social worker in Dubbo. He was the first in his family to attend university and says it takes just one to break a cycle.
My dad, if someone asked him 20 years ago, would he have any grandkids that were university graduates, he probably would have laughed at him and walked away. I just think the world changed, the family's thoughts on education changed, and as a result, they're starting to see that there is a value in education.
We talk about closing the gap in education, closing the gap in health, life expectancies, employment.
Mick Gooder is the recently appointed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission. He's also co-chair of the Close the Gap campaign, which aims for health equality between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians by the year 2030.
Renal failure, diabetes, strokes, cardiovascular type events. And the burden of disease and injury for Aboriginal people is 2.5 times the level for non-Indigenous Australians, and that's a massive difference. We still have developing world standards for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and I think that's one of the great challenges facing Australia.
Mick Gooder says there has been progress, with the Council of Australian Governments pledging $1.5 billion to the issue 3 years ago. But the Commissioner warns that money must be backed up with practical action on the ground.
We've got to do two things. We've got to produce doctors that are generally more conversant with Aboriginal history and the way to deal with Aboriginal people, and more Aboriginal doctors.
Now just let me know if there's any pain.
Kyani Biles is one of 150 Indigenous Australians studying medicine in universities across the country. Of those, 27 are at the University of New South Wales, or UNSW.
You should see the ear canal opening up in front of you.
These students are learning how to do ear tests to diagnose otitis media, or ear infection, which is especially prevalent in Indigenous children.
It causes lifelong effects. So I guess learning things like that, they're just little things you can take away. If you help one person, that's one person that's not going to be left deaf.
Across campus, another group of second years is learning the science of anatomy
And possibly the one that you'll see in the textbooks most often is the angle.
21-year-old Brendan Phillips' father is Aboriginal, his mother Torres Strait Islander. He grew up in Western Sydney, but his spiritual home is Coffs Harbour on the New South Wales mid-north coast. It was there he completed Year 12, studying by candlelight because the family property didn't have electricity.
Does that make sense?
I wanted to be a doctor since I can remember, but I was emboldened by the issues that face the Indigenous community. When I became aware of them, I was motivated. That's what further motivated me to go to med school. They tend to assume that pre-medicine or Indigenous entry is easy. It's not.
Brendan Phillips is mentoring Indigenous high school students in the hope that they will also study medicine. He believes while there are about 140 Indigenous doctors practising in Australia, many more are needed.
I personally have never been treated by an Indigenous doctor, but I would love if I could be.
Why is it important for you?
Because they know where I'm coming from, you know. An Indigenous doctor would know my cultural background, maybe not personally, but would know the issues that are important to me.
I've got a lot of friends, or a few friends, that would prefer, you know, not to go and see non-Indigenous doctors, because I think it does not so much a mistrust, or that it's more of a feeling of judgment or embarrassment.
Okay, your tractor.
Brendan Phillips and Kyani Biles are inspired by the likes of Dr. Kelvin Kong, Australia's first Indigenous surgeon.
The fact that I'm standing in front of you talking about this means that any of you guys can do it.
The ear, nose and throat specialist at John Hunter Hospital in Newcastle says things have come a long way since he was the sole Indigenous medical student at UNSW.
When people work in a lot of Indigenous communities.
One of the things that we talked about when I was going through medical school was, wouldn't it be nice to walk into a room where everyone's an Indigenous medical student and you have a night like tonight where all of those faces in there are all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander medical students is an absolute buzz.
It's incredibly inspiring to have people like Dr. Kelvin Kong. Just seeing that it is possible for Indigenous people to succeed and to go on, it's incredibly driving.
For most of these students, attending university would be impossible if not for the support of scholarships and accommodation assistance. Many of the current cohort at UNSW live at Shalom College, the Jewish residence on campus, where traditional kosher meals are a part of daily life.
It was a hard transition, I have to admit. In my first year at Shalom, I kind of struggled a little bit. This is my second year at Shalom, and I'm definitely fitting in better. I'm actually going really, really well. Last exam I got a personal best.
Once they're in medicine, they have to pass all the exams. There are no two standards in the program.
You are actually start of a new wave going back into communities and delivering what we think is desperately needed in this country.
Some of the students' educations are being bankrolled by millionaire philanthropist Neil Balnaves.
Kyani Biles.
The Dean of Medicine at UNSW, Professor Peter Smith, says his university couldn't support the students without private backing.
It's critically important. Medicine in this country is quite seriously underfunded, and the School of Medicine doesn't have the funds to be able to set up these scholarships itself. So what we have done is established an outreach program to encourage philanthropy.
Because that's what's going to make the sacroiliac joint.
There's no expectation on the Indigenous students to practice back in their communities once they graduate. Brendan Phillips wants to be a general practitioner.
I want to practice rurally and remotely, and have as much contact with the Indigenous community as possible.
Kyani Biles, who wants to be a paediatrician, gets back home to see her family in Dubbo as often as her studies allow. For her, becoming a doctor is the first step in turning the tragic Indigenous health statistics around.
I want to go back to the country and I want to give back to my people, because that's where, for me, that's where the issues are. And if I'm not there, well then how can I try and help?
Rebecca Bailey with that report, and that's the program for tonight.